BC Rich, man. The day that I stop talking about BC Rich on this channel is the day hell freezes over. Hi, so as you can probably tell, I just got out of the shower. I do not usually record with wet hair because I can typically allow myself the minimal amount of time to let my hair dry beforehand, but such is not the case today. Because after I'd gotten out of aforementioned shower, I was greeted with a video on my YouTube front page and a couple of DMs about it in my inbox. Said video being an uncut 40-minute talk by Kevin Proctor, founder of Iconic Guitar, on the topic of layoffs and reorganization at his company. And while in my head this didn't immediately have anything to do with BC Rich, I put the video on 1.5 times speed, and about 5 minutes into it, I understood what was happening. So let me run you through what happened. So if you don't know Iconic Guitar, they are, at least compared to like Gibson, Fender, Ibanez and such, a relatively smaller guitar company running out of Carlsbad, California. They make a lot of, classic Strat and Tele type instruments, but also a lot of like modern take on classic design type guitars, like 7-string Strats with single coils and stuff. I've always been a big fan of their instruments. I haven't gotten to play that many, but there were a few and I've liked them very much. But as it turns out, inside the facility where Iconic was manufacturing their own stuff, they weren't just making Iconic guitars, they were also making stuff for other companies on like an OEM basis. And the way I understood it, the way Kevin told the story, Bill Xavier, CEO of BC Rich, approached Iconic Guitar about making some BC Rich guitars in their facility for them. And I think this was around like 2018, and at the time Kevin had to decline because he was busy nursing a friend of his, and as far as I understood, a colleague as well, back to health. Not really back to health, he was a leukemia sufferer. He was in remission at the time, but then became violently ill again, and unfortunately only made it right up until like the brink of COVID. And so at some point while COVID was like fully raging, Iconic wanted to move into a bigger facility for their stuff and said, you know what, now we can actually take up those BC Rich orders, so if they still haven't gotten anybody for those, we are now available to take on the orders. And to nobody's surprise, Bill hadn't found anybody to build his guitars yet because that man burned every single bridge in this very tightly knit industry such a long time ago. And Kevin, founder of Iconic, being an 80s kid and super into 80s guitar shapes and shred and all of that, was super stoked to be able to be the one who gets to breathe new life into a company that really actually could use some new life being breathed into it. And he was convinced that he was able to do this because he definitely didn't want to be part of yet another BC Rich failure, because that company has changed hands more than a bong at a frat party. It is needless to mention that I would not be sitting here with a microphone right now had everything gone according to plan. So Iconic started taking on some orders. Apparently BC Rich also wasn't the only company that they were doing OEM stuff for. They just signed NDAs for most of that stuff, so they can't actually, mention which companies they build guitars for, but the BC Rich USA stuff was very out in the open. As is the fact apparently that Zoltan Bathory has a very high up role at BC Rich, which I'd heard rumors about before but never mentioned in my videos because I wasn't entirely sure about it, but yeah, apparently that's a thing. So anyway, Iconic takes on a bunch of BC Rich orders, mainly like bolt-on Strat style guitars like the Gunslinger and such, and all that goes well, so BC Rich says, why don't you make these Stranger Things Warlocks for us? You know, the ones that I made an entire separate video about once? And so they take on orders for what apparently was supposed to be 200 Crackle guitars and 200 solid black ones. The solid black I never understood because even though I've never seen Stranger Things, I know for a fact that there is no solid black Warlock in that show. And I think maybe that inaccuracy and the fact that people caught onto it might be part of the reason why all the rest of the stuff happened that I'm about to get to, but I don't know. So yeah, 400 Stranger Things BC Rich guitars. 200 Crackle, 200 black. Except BC Rich then said, and by the way, when I say BC Rich said, I do mean Bill, because he's BC Rich. BC Rich came and said, actually, we don't want the black ones. Well, kind of we do. We want some of the black ones. Maybe just make 200. And in the end, ended up defaulting on the deal, breaching the entire contract, and just going, you know what, actually, fuck you, we don't want any of your guitars. Except remember when I said that Iconic was moving into a bigger facility, and that's why they took on these orders in the first place, because they were now able to handle more stuff with more employees and more capacity? Well, Iconic is neither Gibson, Fender, or Ibanez, nor are they like, World Musical Instruments in Korea, who probably wouldn't give a rat's ass if one of their customers just cancelled an order on them. They rely on every single one of these orders to be able to actually do things like pay the rent in the place that they are leasing. And so, excuse the Seinfeld reference, but yada yada yada, they now have to move back out of the facility that they have like 2.5 years left on the lease agreement for and lay off a bunch of the people that they hired in that new facility. And why? Because BC Rich said, hey, we'll give you some money. And then BC Rich said, hey, actually, fuck that, we're not gonna give you any money. And I don't know what it is, maybe it's these 6 or so videos I've already made on what a shitty company BC Rich and what a shitty person Bill Xavier is, but I am not very surprised by this. But I do feel incredibly bad for Kevin, and not just for Kevin, but also especially for the people that Kevin has to lay off now, because there's nothing for them to do, and they can't be paid because BC Rich isn't holding up their end of the agreement, as usual. And if you want the full story, because the original video is 40 fucking minutes long, so I am very, very much paraphrasing here, it's linked in the description. Go to the Iconic Guitars YouTube channel, watch Kevin's video, because it is very informative. I really do feel for Iconic Guitars. I'm glad to hear, and Kevin definitely made this clear in the video, that they are not shutting down. They are simply having to scale down and lay off a bunch of people in order to stay afloat, but they are not going to declare bankruptcy or anything over this. And that is fantastic to hear, because they're a great company, and it would really, really be a bummer for them to have to shut down over something that BC Rich did. But for some reason, everything that Bill Xavier touches kind of just turns to shit. And while I really was hoping to be able to go all of 2024 without uttering the words BC Rich, I only made it 2 weeks into this new year before another story about BC Rich doing something shitty just had to be told. Again, I am very much paraphrasing in this video, because it is also just meant to draw more attention to the situation and for you to go watch Kevin's video yourself, because that video on a channel with 1,000 subscribers from a small guitar company just isn't going to get the attention that it deserves. So if you want to know more about this situation, go over there. If you want to buy an Iconic guitar, you know, support this company in a time of need, then I suppose I'll put a link to their stuff in the description as well. They really do make some fantastic instruments. Subscribe somewhere over there. Again, all the links in the description, my social media in the description as well. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, and I'll see you around.